ICQ Podcast, episode 302, Howard Michel, Whiskey Bravo 2, India Tango X-Ray. Well, hi there everybody, welcome to this episode 302 of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported as always by our monthly and annual subscription donors. This show is a little bit different from some of our ones. We're experimenting with the idea of companion shows with interviews and topics that maybe don't fit within the normal show cycle every fortnight, and we're going to potentially release some extra shows along the way. So this is the first show of that. Frank Howell, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, interviewed Howard Michel recently after the ARRL board meeting that took place in July, and got an update on what the board are doing from the ARRL side of things. So we wanted to get this information out to you as quickly as possible, so hence the reason we're popping it into this companion show. So thanks a lot, Frank, for catching up with Howard. Well, we'll start off, with catching up with some things that have been going on in the last episode too. So, Dad, I'm going to hand over to you first, because you've got some news about the GQRP Club, haven't you?
Yes, certainly have, Colin, and Steve Hartley contacted or sent me an email the other day. But the GQRP Club will have their convention that takes place next weekend, Saturday the 31st of August, with a build-a-thon and a social gathering. That's taking place at Harper Adams University campus in Telford. So if you're interested, guys, look up on the GQRP website and you'll get all the details there. This year they're kind of honouring George Jobs' G3RJV, who's now a silent key, but they're kind of going to build on the build-a-thon a Sunday Best VFO, which was designed by George, and then have a drift challenge shootout. So the one that drifts the least wins. Hi. Interesting little bit of fun, I'd suggest. They do have speakers on the Sunday, and I believe Colin, G3VTT, will be speaking about QRP at sea, and Peter Parker, VK3YE, will be giving his views from down under. So I assume that one is a Skype or a network link into the event. I don't think Peter's actually physically coming over. Could be wrong, but there you go. So being a member of the GQRP Club, they do a lot of nice things, and in fairness, if you've got time next Sunday and you live in the northern part of England, or you fancy travelling up there, why not travel up to Telford and go to the GQRP convention? Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, so next announcement to make here, the Hiram Percy Maxim birthday celebration will be taking place from the 31st of August to the 8th of September 2019, and it's to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the birth of the ARRL co-founder and its first president, Hiram Percy Maxim Whiskey 1 Alpha Whiskey. So basically the objective of this event is to work as many participating stations as possible, and all ARRL members and the call station can append their call sign with /150 during the event. So certainly a worthwhile event to take forward there, and you may or may not know that the ICQ podcast's own Ruth Willett, Kilo Mike 4 Lima Alpha Oscar, is a previous winner of the award. She won the award back in 2018. So to say, certainly well worthwhile taking part in that exchange. More information as always on the ICQpodcast.com website for you to get more information. Back to you, Dad.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, AMSAT Symposium are calling for papers. Now, this is the AMSAT Symposium for the 50th anniversary in the States, to be held on the weekend of the 18th to 20th of October, down there in Virginia, I believe. Notes will be in the full address, obviously, on their website and on our website as well. So, effectively, they're asking for papers, possible speakers as well, but if you're around that weekend, why not pop along to the AMSAT Symposium and have a look and see what's going on. There's a hell of a lot going on in space at the moment. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, and we just round up our announcements here before we head off to the Howard Michel interview with news about HomeBrew Heroes, which is the fantastic award scheme developed by Frank and, as I say, myself and Dad back just a few months ago. Frank's been working hard on this award scheme, and he's happy to announce a new corporate prize sponsor. I think this is the third one now he's raised, and MFJ Enterprises are going to be donating a very special prize to the recipient of, say, the HomeBrew Heroes Award. They're going to be using their HF VHF 2-port graphic antenna analyzer as a product to donate as a prize award winning there. So certainly, I say, this is certainly starting to build up into a very, very wonderful prize for people who are in the home brew space, and I say certainly a great opportunity to really reward the people that do so much for those of us who like to build kits, etc. in our hobby. If I can point you to homebrewheroes.org, where you can find all the latest information about the award. And as I say, I may have mentioned this a couple of times on the show recently. As I say, that committee, Dad, that are going to have to choose the winner of this award really have a very difficult job. Thank God that you and I are only, helping this to get developed and, working on the marketing, because I really wouldn't want to be choosing the winner, because this looks like a very, very difficult thing to choose a winner on. But I'm sure the selection committee will make a fine judgment in due course when that comes up. Well, now we head over to, our interview with Howard Michel, and his discussions with Frank in relation to, the recent goings-on at the ARRL at the board level and what they're doing for their members. So, guys, hope you enjoy Frank's interview. And, let us know how you think of this new, slightly different format of the show for between episodes. Just visit ICQpodcast.com, click on the Contact Us section, and let us know.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert-free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Hello everyone, this is Frank K4FMH, Fox Mike Hotel, for the ICQ podcast. And I'm delighted today to have as my interview guest Howard Michel, WB2ITX. He is no longer the new CEO of the ARRL. He's been involved in several board meetings and a lot of Hamfest, Xenia, and most recently in Huntsville, Alabama, where I had the pleasure of also being there and running into Howard. Welcome, Howard.
Hey, Frank. Welcome to you. Thanks for being here and to talk to the listeners.
We have a lot of interested listeners, as our feedback in Xenia and in Huntsville, somehow wearing a bright orange shirt can attract a crowd. We found out. So we get a lot of buttonhole feedback. It's been extremely humbling at the positive feedback. And the fact that we've had some conversations with you is something that has certainly been recognized by our listeners in a very positive way, and they're delighted that you're willing to do this kind of outreach. Now, one of the things that we certainly saw at Hamvention particularly is they want me to hold your feet to the fire. So I hope you've got asbestos socks on here today, friend, because I'm about to ask you some questions, mainly from the current board meeting, and I want to tell our listeners the Word document for the minutes is available on ARRL.org, and you can find those board minutes and read them for detail, and I will greatly encourage you to do that. And if you're a member, this is part of your participation in the league, is your way of being up on what the league is doing, and those who are elected or paid, in the case of Howard, to do things to serve you, kind of your responsibility to do some of that. Now, since our last interview back in March, Howard, what's the one thing that the ARRL has done to increase value toward being a member? That's been a little bit of your mantra as the new CEO. We want to increase the value of being a member. What have you done since then?
Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's something I think I'm proud of right now, is we're actually going to come out with a new magazine this year. You know, you might think that what's it take to publish a new magazine is a simple job. It's not. And so we have a target audience in mind. It's going to be called On the Air. It's going to be for new hams. And we're looking at a 2 to 3 year rolling content. And by that, I mean that you could pick the magazine up at any point in those 2 to 3 years and have something that helps you get on the air, gets active, gets you involved in the hobby. You don't have to start with edition 1 and go all the way to the end. But then after you've done that for 2 to 3 years, thought is that you're going to have all the value out of on the air that you could get, and you're going to transition naturally to QST, or possibly, we're talking about other mini mags, we call them, something like QEX or NCJ, where members can actually select the content or the magazine that best appeals to their pursuit of the hobby.
Well, that sounds terrific. Now, will this be in both digital and print, or just digital?
So we're looking at both digital and print. We're going to make it available free to all members in digital format. When you join or renew, you could actually select this if you want on the air instead of QST. We're hoping that not a lot of members drop QST, that they actually take this as an additional publication. But we hope actually that the new hams will find interest in this. What we're hearing from the new hams is I've got my license, and then they say, now what? In the name of the podcast, right? And now what? And so what this is going to do is help them get active, get involved, find a real passion, their passion, for the hobby. And that'll tie in, I think, directly with the lifelong learning, where we're looking to brand it as make ham radio your own ham radio. And not everybody, if you remember my column a while back, the spectrum of hams, every ham is someplace on that grid between service and hobby and technology communicating, but more likely they're a path through that, and they're a soft path through that. But everybody has a unique path, and we want to make sure that the league is providing value for all those individuals.
That sounds terrific to me. I'm a member of several clubs, but it's a challenge for local clubs to Elmer hams. Not every ham chooses to be an Elmer. It does take time. So I think this will really help in the Elmering arena. One little thing that I'm hearing there is something that I particularly appreciate. We have a lot of categories. I used to say we have hardening of the categories, like hardening of the arteries. And if you say, what's a real ham, you get a lot of different answers. And I posted on eHam on the little, my friend who does that, Dick Bentley, said, hey, Frank, send me something. I don't have many things to put up here. So I wrote a little quick one and sent it to him, and he posted, it was real hams are ... those with a valid license. I literally got hate mail, Howard, and I won't reveal the hater, but I got actually threatening hate mail because I posted that. Well, okay, that's fine. You get strange reactions sometimes, but the point I'm getting at is we have hams of all kinds. Some are CW ops, some like to build, some like to do MCOM and have kind of a shack on a belt and help out with a bike race or when there's bad weather, and others like to Elmer, and others like to give talks, and others like to do a lot of things. And so and I've left out a bunch there. So I hope that in this magazine, embrace that diversity of you can be a ham with lots of different activities. To be a ham, you kind of have to have a license, but ham radio is a plethora of things.
So it is, and the magazine will. And, to take your point a little bit further, all those different hams give us a diversity. And some people maybe don't appreciate how valuable diversity is. But I've thought about this for a long time, and I look at, evolution. And species that have diversity can adapt to change in the environment. And species that don't have the diversity, they become extinct. And what we don't want to have is amateur radio become extinct because we've narrowed ourselves down to think we're one thing when really the world is changing, and we need to embrace it all, and we need to have the strength of diversity to embrace it all. So that's my philosophy.
And I'm very simpatico with that. And you and I, having both been professors, dealt with a lot of younger people, and with our growing interest in, hey, how do we kind of get younger people in the hobby, is we need to have and embrace the diversity by which they reach out to amateur radio, and certainly botics and makers and things like that are certainly part of it. So I am delighted. We're talking with Howard Michel, WB2ITX, CEO of the American Radio Relay League. It's okay. You answered my tough question here. Let me hit you with my other question. I had an op-ed piece on my blog, and I pointed out how financially, by giving up about 45% to Amazon, you're the wholesaler, they're the retailer on ARRL book, that you could stop that, at least for members, and give them free shipping and still make more money. And you said, well, look, let's run the numbers. Let's look at it and this kind of thing. Many people who gave me feedback on my op-ed on my blog didn't read the blog, and they said, oh, just pass it on to the user. No, there's a financial way to do that. Whether you do it or not depends on your internal numbers and your philosophy about what to do. So that's my second hold your feet to the fire question. What'd you come up with on that?
So we did look at that, and actually, I talked to people who have looked at this question in the past, and what we find out is that if we give free shipping, we actually sell less product, which seems counterintuitive. But what we find is, once I was told this, I think about when I shop, and it says, well, I need to get a couple more things to, I guess, cover or amortize the cost of the shipping. So while it would cost us money to provide the free shipping, it would also financially impact us by actually having our sales volume go down. So from a business sense, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do it. And I recognize a lot of people are not going to be happy with that answer.
Well, and of course, I'm the one that made that argument, and yet I'm not terribly disappointed, because what I wanted you to do is look at it, and you have done that, and that is the answer. And so I don't want the ARRL to lose money for the wrong reason. Now, since Jerry Achenbach, the PhD psychologist for a grocery store, invented that obtrusive kiosk in the middle of a grocery aisle to make you stop and look and perhaps buy on impulse, we've done things to lose money. You can buy Coca-Cola in liter bottles for 89 cents and that grocery store loses money. There's a good reason to lose money, but this may not be one of them. And I just wanted you to take a look at it. And so there you go. And that's why we have op-eds, and that's why we have folks in offices to actually vet the idea. So I'm not terribly disappointed, but I thought that could be a quick win. You went through the process, and those are the numbers. Now, let me give a backup. Can you have a fixed amount of shipping and handling regardless of volume? That would be my next argument.
And I haven't looked at that per se. It might make sense. Not charging the shipping just strictly to cover the cost. We'd go crazy, I think, doing all those calculations. So it is somewhat of an approximation, but we can certainly look at what we're charging and how we're calculating it. We do the same thing with the QSL cards coming in, right? So
yeah. Well, the thing that those of us who are Amazon Prime members need to realize is that on Amazon's end, it doesn't always get there in 2 days, and it isn't always free. So, even Amazon has its liabilities on that. But you've looked at it, and I really appreciate that. Maybe our listeners will then hear that and understand that you guys are crunching the numbers to their benefit, so you're doing good in the organization. Let me follow up with...
Well, before you go on, Frank, let me just add.
You bet.
So what I want to emphasize to the listeners is that the staff is very professional about these things. They really are. They take their jobs to heart. They look at the data. We don't make snap decisions. A lot of people, when you look from the outside, you think you see a simple answer, but when you actually start taking things apart, it's a complicated system. And so we have data, we look at data, we try and make informed decisions, and I'm proud of the staff, the way they operate to do these kind of things. And I'd like the listeners also to understand that.
And that's a fair statement, because I've been in those business operations and helped put together some data systems and things. And here's the tough one on that one. But yet you're cracking the tough nut I'm about to describe. Insider baseball, if you will, versus the fan in the stands, worlds apart, unless the rationale for the insider baseball is revealed to them, then they have a better understanding. And that's what you're doing now.
That's right. And you were in Huntsville. I think you attended my forum. I start off and say, this is not a presentation. I'm starting a conversation, and the conversation is two-way. And I need to understand, what your concerns are, and you need to understand, what my concerns are. And as person to person, we can have a conversation. We may not agree at the end of the conversation, but we'll have respect for each other. And I think we're better off doing that.
And communication, whether it's at a large regional ham fest like Huntsville, or whether you're at Hamvention, or whether you're on a podcast like this, communication from an institutional position where you are is a challenge to get to the hams who talk about it at coffee shops, who talk about it at Hamfest, who talk about it on the air, who talk about it on bulletin boards, and so on and so on. You have fewer opportunities to do it. So I appreciate the fact that you're doing it now, and hopefully our listeners will have a better understanding that no question, certainly no serious question, go unvetted. And that's what I'm hearing you say. And I know Bob Interbitson at least enough at this point to know that he's kind of nervously anxious about answering those questions, because I see him with gears who get rolling to understand, and what he does as marketing manager, it's an important role for the ARRL. I dare say you might not be able to function anything like you currently currently function without someone in his role being very effective and conscientious. So these are the things that are really important. And that conversation, as you described it, as the one of the leaders, certainly the president of ARRL and your elected division director or other very visible leaders. But communicating from you all is very important. But a lot of people see you as the key one in some ways, certainly as they interact with Newington, because that's where you're located in, and you manage the staff there. So it's good to hear those comments, Howard.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Yeah, and I think I'm very proud of the staff, and I take a lot of pride in the fact that I was selected to manage such a professional staff. And you're right. I mean, I couldn't do my job without them. And I think anybody in this position would be a fool to think they could do the job without the staff.
A side note to all those out there listening who are club presidents, job one, when you're the leader, get behind your people, understand them, know them, and support them unless they're wrong. And so what you're hearing Howard do is role model that. My guest today is Howard Michel, WB2ITX, CEO of the American Radio Relay League, about the activities of the recent Board of Directors meeting. Let's transition. You gave a report to the board.
So I'm managing what I call a risk assessment process. And I'm going to describe verbally the picture. On a scale of left to right, I have potential impact, low to high, and a vertical scale, likelihood of occurrence, low to high. And what I look at then when I see this, it's called the fever chart. The upper right is high likely occurrence and large impact. That area of the chart is red. So the middle of the chart is yellow, and then the lower left is green. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it's less likely to have a negative impact on the organization. And when I presented to the board in January, my initial assessment, I said in membership is half our revenue, and like most membership organizations, it's a struggle to keep members and actually grow membership. Towards the lower left, I had things like VEC and awards. And what I did to the board in July is updated. So my vision of managing is to move everything from the upper right towards the lower left. And it isn't going to happen immediately, and it isn't going to be smooth. And I presented to the board in January, moving membership into the yellow and ultimately, down and to the left. To move it down means that we have developed new programs to retain members, get new members, basically decrease the likelihood that membership is a problem. To move it to the left, I need to decrease its impact on the organization. That doesn't mean decrease the amount of money we get from dues, but to find other sources of revenue. So each one of the major business units is someplace on this chart. What I presented to the board in July was an update. Several things actually moved in the wrong direction. So the first one I want to address to the members is the VEC program. I moved it up, which means it's more likely to be a problem. And the reason I'm doing that is that when the government shut down earlier this year, there was obviously no people taking exams. And we expected that to bounce back, and it hasn't. So there's something going on. The long-term trend of people actually taking the exam is down about 15%. We need to understand, is that a permanent thing? Why is that a thing? And obviously, if that is real, not just the VEC program, but everything else that we do is going to be impacted. So I moved that up. It's more of a concern for me than it was. It's still not a high concern because I'm not terribly convinced that this is a long-term problem, but we need to understand. So we'll take a look at that. The other one that I moved in the wrong direction is development. Listeners may have seen the announcement that Lauren Clark left the organization for personal reasons. I don't think that's a permanent problem. I think that in some sense is an opportunity, but clearly without a development officer in place, making our outreach to members and the foundation also could be impacted. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're covering it with existing staff, but I wanted to raise the level of attention to the board as that's a concern.
We're talking with Howard Michel, WB2ITX, CEO of the American Radio Relay League.
On a positive note, though, I moved advertising down from where it was in red into yellow. And the reason I did that is we have some new sources of revenue coming in. So we have the Morse code certificate. We have some advertising coming in from some of the digital products. They're not large at this point, but they're new sources of advertising revenue. So that's a move in the right direction. I think we can build on those. I think we can actually bring in a lot more money across the spectrum of advertising publications, products and stuff. That reduces the risk, and it also reduces the impact. So that's a positive message. So that's how I presented it to the board and how I'm looking at managing the organization, and what I keep in front of me every day. Is this picture, at least in my mind, of where I need to focus my attention without forgetting the whole big picture.
This, for our listeners, from my background in dealing with volunteer organizations, nonprofits, and others, this is the leading edge of management strategies. It's a very rational approach, as opposed to you have 5 business divisions, you have 5 directors of those divisions. Once a quarter, you get together over drinks and say, how's it going? And hope that no one's lying to you. There are many companies who went fine until they didn't, using that amount. But what I'm hearing Howard talk about is one that is data-centric, latest and best numbers. And I suspect coupling that chart with your quality management council meetings really helps the folks who report to you, because they get problems before you and share those problems, and maybe another silo director, so to speak, has solved that problem or has that problem, or at least you can figure out a problem. The other thing is this: the development part is often seen as someone who's chasing whales for casinos or fat cats for big, huge foundations, but it's an ongoing, everyday process. So I know you're concerned about getting those development functions and getting someone in. A good development officer pays his or her freight many times over for the organization, that's for sure.
Yeah, so let me actually hit on that. I mean, so one of the messages I gave to the board is, while we present a balanced budget every year, the budget is not balanced strictly on operations. The revenue from products and services that we sell doesn't cover the cost of producing them. So development fills in that gap. And without development, and so this is a pitch for everybody who wants to donate $5 or $10 or $100,000. We need that money. And I'd like to actually get the operations such that the operations pays for operations, and we can use funds raised from development to invest in the business and invest in the future. The other point I want to make is that you're right. So the management council and the philosophy of managing that I'm taking to the organization, everybody is in the process of building their plans, the budget for 2020, 2021. I told them I want them to look at their business and create one of these fever charts themselves. And where is it that you need to be concerned with as a manager, as opposed to just a knee-jerk reaction to the problem that comes into your office in the morning? Let's have a plan on how we're going to develop all the businesses the same way I'm developing the overall business.
That's great news, and I think any of our listeners who are in management or want to be in management will certainly take heed of that, and those who are not will certainly understand that where you may fail, it will not be a failure based on things you haven't thought about. It will be certainly things you've analyzed. Let me switch gears a little bit. Our friendly neighbors to the north in Canada, they often hold ARRL membership, and a lot of them in the border cities are, they come and go into the U.S., every day, just like we may go on a shopping trip to a big mall somewhere. I understand the president of the Radio Amateurs of Canada, RAC, visited with you and had some remarks. How are the Canadian amateurs doing, Howard?
So they're a lot like we are, and I would say not just us and the Canadians, but I was in Friedrichshafen. A lot of the hams were members of their own national societies and ARRL, probably for the same reasons that the Canadians are members of ARRL. We're all wrestling with the same problems. Decline in interest in amateur radio, decline in interest in associations in general. Big telecom companies trying to buy up large chunks of the spectrum. And what we all talked about was how do we band together to be the strongest offense against the attacks on the hobby. And so that's, I think, what I see with the Radio Amateurs of Canada as an organization. They're struggling with the same things we are, and they're looking for partners, and we are certainly their partner in going forward with these issues.
Let me also ask, what's the kind of relationship does the league have with the counterpart association in Mexico? Do you have much interaction there?
I don't, and I don't know, and I can check and see if there's any history going back. If we did, it would probably be through the IARU Region 2. Have a meeting that I'm going to be attending down in Lima, Peru, and I think within IAR Region 2, which is the Americas, Mexico, the U.S., Canada, I would assume Brazil also, those are the strong players. And so I want to make some inroads into those organizations, not just Mexico, but the others in our hemisphere.
Let me tell tell you something that's certainly a pleasant reading. One of the things that the league does was that the foundation for the ARRL awarded $110,000 in scholarships during the last budget cycle. And I think Mr. Norton gave you a report on that. I mean, that's fantastic.
That is. I mean, that absolutely is. And it's happening in small dollar amounts, and some are larger scholarships. But I mean, and you as a professor and I as a professor understand, a lot of these families, they struggle to send their sons and daughters to college, and every little bit helps. And so if they get a $500 scholarship, that's, think about $10 an hour, that's 50 hours the student doesn't have to work in a part-time job, either in the summer or through the school year, that he could either be doing something productive with his life or, spending time actually studying the material and working harder in class. So these are very important scholarships, and there's a lot of them that we give out.
One of the things as the league and other groups try to do the college amateur radio club roundup, there might be food for thought in the future about trying to do something around those clubs, that those clubs might be able to participate in terms of generating revenue. College students, I found, are very ingenious about raising money in general. So just a thought, but I wanted to point out the meritorious stuff that the foundation does.
Frank, while we're talking about colleges, let me just jump in that we're looking at having a year-long event focused around university clubs. It's going to take a little bit of planning, so we're looking at 2021, not next year. But similar to what we've done with summits on the air and national parks on the air, except this is going to be focused on the universities. And the thought is, with enough planning, we can get enough of the alumni from these universities active, involved, and get the students engaged. And I think we all benefit from this event as opposed to just clicking off QSOs.
Oh, you bet. And let me point out, I did a little research here in Mississippi just because one of our clubs said we're the oldest club in the state. And I thought, well, wow, is that so? I mean, they go back to the 40s. Well, and I looked at some of the historical experimental licenses given, and I found that at the two largest universities in Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, commonly called Ole Miss, and Mississippi State University, where I hold emeritus status, they got two of the very first experimental amateur radio licenses that were out there around 1913, and they were professors in their respective campuses. And so those two clubs are actually the two oldest clubs in this state. I don't think Mississippi is likely to be unique in that regard. So there might be some really cool history as you go through some of that, and you might see some of these college clubs or some of the origins of amateur radio in this country.
Yeah, that's a good point.
On the budget, on the money issue, your budget certainly seems to be stable.
Yeah, I think it is. We're looking to grow new sources of revenue, but it's a struggle.
But the good part is, when it's a struggle, it's good that it's a struggle and we're losing money versus it's a struggle but we're stable. I mean, that's an entirely different picture. So that is very good, and the listeners can read the report and see it. Let me segue something that's been controversial and sensitive, and certainly our listeners can read the details. Very often, any board, any volunteer organization can engage in activity that later a future board sees, we messed up on that. We shouldn't have done that. We had some either errors in judgment or reading our bylaws, or we just had some poor thinking or whatever. I've been on boards. I've been there. I've been in that scenario. So one of the things that's reported in the minutes that's a little bit of a sensitive issue, it's certainly been a schism in the ham community, was the rescinding of the previous censure of Dick Norton in 6AA. And I was very happy to see that the board handled it in at least what I consider to be a very mature, a very professional way. And I simply wanted to comment on that. I'm sure there was some deep discussions on the current board. What was approved in the minutes it can be read by all, but it looks like that issue from a board's perspective has been put to bed. It's been made public. And I just want to commend you. You work for the board, report to the board, but I'm speaking with you. I want to commend you for the board's actions in dealing with that in a way that hopefully heals that schism, and it is kind of no longer hanging around. And it was adopted without opposition. Anyway, I just want to acknowledge that, and I certainly hope that schism certainly has been healed, and we're moving on. So
Yeah, I appreciate that, Frank. And as you're kind of aware, I don't want to get into the details of the board discussion, but I think you summarized it, fairly accurately. The board looked at this in new light, and they came to I think it might have been unanimous decision, and I think they're looking to move forward. And I think this is a good thing. It's a healing thing.
one of the positive things that I read in the board minutes where there were just a number of awards that were approved in the various categories for meritorious amateurs who contribute to amateur radio community. For me, this is a bona fide and great activity for a group like the ARRL to engage in. There are a number of them. They're in the minutes and listed in the rationale for what they did, and many of them are very well-known hams. One I want to point out, for the reasons I'll articulate, is the one to Hector Morales, NP3IR in Puerto Rico, for his nickname is the professor because he's done so much in the way of teaching. The recent hurricanes and devastating impact in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and the role that the ARRL with the Aries team, among other volunteer organizations and nonprofits, really begs the question for the league to do some specific outreach for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I know President Rick Roderick at a meeting I was at a couple of years ago, one of my recommendations was that Western Mountain in Puerto Rico kind of needs a permanent repeater to be on the air at all times. And I think that's a small thing that can be done, but a good thing that can be done, perhaps also in the Virgin Islands. The other thing is, I don't know if an automatic link establishment or AOL station or something like that between Puerto Rico and the mainland might be established so that we are anticipatory rather than reactionary to terrible hurricanes and devastation there. But I was delighted to see all of those awards given, Howard.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I mean, and the board recognizes these awards with a vote of applause. And so that probably doesn't translate out to the field how important the board treats these things.
I would encourage our listeners to go read who won some of those awards, and I'm sure they're on the ARRL website. Now, I want to ask you to shed light on something. We've had this controversy about some digital modes, whether they meet the criterion established for encryption, which is contrary to Part 97. Most hams don't use digital modes. I don't know what percentage it would be there, but it's certainly safe to say most hams don't use digital modes, like many hams don't use CW. So if you don't use the digital mode, you may not understand it at the kind of the under the hood and at the grassroots level, the nuts and bolts level, about how some things work. The recent issue, and the board had some decision making that's been going on for a while, issues raised by the Don Roth petition, as well as Ted Rappaport communications. Can you help shed some light on that for our listeners? What the heck is the deal?
So I can talk a little bit about it. I'm certainly not an expert on these things. And I don't want to get into, the board had a long, deliberation on this issue.
As it should have.
They should. And we actually started on Thursday evening. We had some presentations before the board meeting, and David Sadal, a communications attorney, actually spent about an hour or so talking about the nuances of these things. And so the board motion, and you can read it in the minutes, basically reaffirmed that we agree that the matter was settled, with Don Ralph, that encryption of messages is prohibited. And encryption, though, is defined as the purpose of obscuring the meaning of the message. And so that's where some of the discussion comes. Is encoding encryption, or is encoding just a means of increasing data efficiency? And I think there's parties on both sides of it. The board didn't take a position. They said, we're going to go back to the matter of Don Rolfe and say that encryption of messages is prohibited. And if the technology is encryption for the purpose of obscuring the meaning, then it's prohibited. If the so-called encryption is not encryption to obscure messages, but to compact data, then that's not encryption as defined by the FCC rules.
And that's the board should have gotten legal expertise, as it did, and it certainly had what I call a cattle call invite for all the technical in input. The rank and file hams, after thrashing through some of the public disclosures, I think our listeners would all agree they didn't quite fully understand it. In the middle of all that, you had some other things like an amateur in Canada and an amateur in the U.S. actually pass a Bitcoin, I think on 20 meters. The whole purpose of the Bitcoin is predicated on sufficient encryption, so it's not like a dollar bill you can take off someone's desk and steal it. It's intentionally encrypted on its basic purpose. Well, that seems to violate the spirit of encryption. I had a little discussion on Twitter, of all things, and had some hams argue vociferously it was not encryption. Yet, there are things that the FCC, with the growth in technology, has to deal with. The ARRL is a friend of the court, if you will, because it stands there representing amateur radio for the U.S. and technically for its members, even if they're outside the U.S. So there's a role for the ARRL to be kind of a bully pulpit on some of these things. It's very important. The pony in this room, if you buy the metaphor, is that, wow, we have become so sophisticated that these things are issues. And that in itself is a good thing if we can regulate them and keep them legal and don't get ourselves on a path that will lead us outside of federal regs. You know, in the world of genetics, the CRISPR technology can do gene splicing, and that in itself is a great thing. But, oh, wow. Are there issues? Incredibly so. And so encryption, going back to why, and I'm speaking to our listeners mainly, Howard, but going back to why the federal government asked hams to cease and desist during a time of war, because enemies could use that to communicate, and they wanted the airways cleared so they could listen to them. Well, that was a very good reason to do it. By the same token, there are concerns about using encryption, and it could be used for reasons of malfeasance and treason and all those things. So you guys and your board had a tough one to get their arms around because it involves some very, very deep technical issues. And yet we have to come up with a practical solution vis-a-vis Part 97 and the law in making recommendations to the FCC. So it sounds like the board did its job and did as good a job as it could. And we'll see where it goes because of our technological advance. I doubt the story's over, but at least we've got current position, and that is what the league should have done, in my opinion.
You know, I think you're absolutely right. You know, and this is sitting as a non-voting member in the discussion. I was very proud of how the board actually approached this. I mean, it was a thoughtful, informed, deep discussion, nuances, and I was very proud of the board making this decision.
Well, look, let me wind up with this. What's the most important thing that you as the CEO of the ARRL would like our listeners, both in the U.S. and worldwide, to know?
I guess what I'd like you to know, like the listeners to know, is that I'm approaching this job very seriously. I'm coming in, shaking things up. I'm not trying to wreck the ship. I don't want to capsize the ship, but we want to change course. But I'm doing it, as quick as I can, but in a thoughtful manner. And so some of the things I'm doing right now may not appear to be much, but I'm laying the groundwork for a plan. And I actually just was finishing an editorial. I'm going to write Second Century column. I think it's probably the November one, where I talk about the role of the CEO. And the role of the CEO actually is to envision the future, to understand the present, and then make that future vision real in his mind, his or her mind, with all the warts and the benefits and everything, but make it real. And then create a plan, a path to get from the current state to that future vision, and also make that real. And then get everybody to follow the organization along that path. They can't see the path. They're not quite sure where the vision is. And that's what I'm trying to do. Is I've looked at where I think we need to be. I've looked at where we are. I'm taking steps to get us there. And I want the members to understand that doing this in a very serious, thoughtful manner.
A very good statement. And I will say this. I live on a large lake. Our neighborhood has a marina. And anyone who sails knows that every ship collects barnacles. And it slows that ship down. And those barnacles need to be cleaned, and they need to be cleaned, however, in the right way. You can sand a hole in your boat if you don't watch it. So with that metaphor, that's just part of any organization that is active and ongoing. So that is a very good statement, I think, for where you are and what at least most of us see you as doing. An upside that I want to just underscore is that you have folks like the ICQ podcast, and as you know, there are many, many others, and and some people have blogs, and there are a lot of opinions. Some of them may be more reasoned than others, and individual viewers and listeners can decide for those. But to have that media, having opinions, whether they're good or bad, whether the free shipping works or not, what I appreciate is the league now wants to engage with those. And that also helps drive that ship, even if it's not in the direction that those are suggesting you go in. It's been reasoned and thought through and not just rejected because, as I used to say, we're the ARRL and you're not. So I want to congratulate you on that, the perspective that you're bringing to the league, Howard, and I appreciate you being here once again on the ICQ podcast. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks to the listeners for spending time listening.
7-3, sir.
Take care.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.